Mark Hunter, an experienced archaeologist, stood at the edge of a cliff, gazing at the landscape before him. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the barren desert that stretched for miles. He had spent most of his life uncovering the secrets of ancient civilizations, but this site was different. It was remote, far from the beaten path, and the ruins seemed untouched by time. Mark had stumbled upon it by accident during a routine dig, but he knew this discovery would be the biggest of his career. The team he led was small, but dedicated. His colleague, Sarah, stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Are you sure this is the right spot, Mark?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. Mark nodded. "Yes. The readings were clear. There's something down there, something ancient. We've barely scratched the surface." They descended into the excavation site, a large, hidden temple buried beneath the sand. It had taken weeks to clear the entrance, but now they were finally inside, exploring the dark chambers. The air was thick with dust and the flickering. Light from their torches barely illuminated the stone walls covered in strange symbols. Mark could feel the weight of history in the air, as though the very walls were whispering secrets from the past. As they moved deeper into the temple, the air grew colder. Mark's breath came out in visible puffs, a sign that something was off. But he didn't care. His heart raced with excitement as they came upon an altar at the far end of the chamber. On it lay a sword, its blade shimmering faintly in the torchlight. "Do you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with awe. Mark stepped forward, his boots crunching on the stone floor. The sword was unlike any weapon he had ever seen before. It was sleek and elegant, with strange markings running along the blade, symbols that seemed to shift and change with the light. He could feel an unusual energy emanating from it, as if the sword was alive. His fingers hovered above the hilt, hesitant but compelled. "I don't know what it is, but it's important," he said quietly, almost to himself. With a deep breath, he reached out and grasped the sword's hilt. The moment his fingers touched it, a jolt of energy shot through his body like a lightning bolt. His muscles tensed, and for a brief second he thought he might collapse. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came, leaving him with a strange sense of connection to the weapon. He lifted it slowly, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The sword seemed to hum with power, its energy pulsing like a heartbeat. "Mark, be careful!" Sarah called out, her voice filled with concern. But Mark didn't hear her. His eyes were fixed on the blade, and his mind was consumed by the feeling that this sword had a purpose, that it was meant for him to wield. He turned the weapon over, examining the symbols etched into its surface. As he did, his eyes caught a faint inscription near the base of the blade, written in a language he didn't recognize. It was old, very old, and yet the symbols seemed strangely familiar. Suddenly, he felt something else, an overwhelming presence. It was as if the sword was speaking to him, its energy pressing against his mind. Mark couldn't understand the words, but the message was clear. "All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies." The words echoed in his mind, growing, louder and louder, until they drowned out everything else. The ground beneath him trembled, and the walls of the temple seemed to shift. For a moment, Mark felt disoriented, unsure of where he was. "Mark, snap out of it!" Sarah's voice broke through the fog in his mind. He shook his head, blinking rapidly as if waking from a dream. The feeling of the sword's power faded, and he was back in the temple, standing over the altar. Sarah was beside him, her hand on his shoulder, concern written on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaky. Mark nodded, though his heart still raced. "I'm fine," he said, but the words felt hollow. He wasn't sure he believed them himself. There was something about this sword, something that felt wrong yet incredibly powerful. "Let's get it out of here," Sarah suggested, her voice tense. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Mark agreed, but as he held the sword, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was something more to this. Discovery, something hidden within the ancient temple. As they prepared to leave, Mark's thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash from deep within the ruins. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving. Sarah's eyes widened in fear, and Mark's grip tightened around the sword's hilt. They weren't alone. "We need to get out of here now," Sarah whispered urgently. But Mark couldn't bring himself to leave just yet. The sword was too important, and now that it had chosen him, he couldn't simply walk away. "Let's explore further," Mark said, his voice firm, though a part of him wondered what he had just gotten himself into. As they moved deeper into the temple, Mark felt the sword's energy grow stronger. It was guiding him, pulling him forward, and with every step, the weight of the inscription on the blade seemed to grow heavier in his mind. "All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies." Something ancient, something dangerous was awakening. And Mark had no idea what it would mean for him or for the world. Mark's journey back home felt endless. The sword, still wrapped carefully in cloth, sat beside him on the passenger seat of his car. Despite the distance, he could still feel its presence. It was like an invisible weight pressing against his chest, pulling at his thoughts. He couldn't explain it. He had never felt this way about an artifact before. As he drove, the wind whipped through the open windows, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Sarah had insisted on staying behind, unsure about the power the sword seemed to hold. Mark had told her they would need time to study it, time to figure out what they had uncovered. But even as the words left his mouth, he felt uncertain. What? If they had just unleashed something they couldn't control? When Mark finally reached his small home on the outskirts of the city, the weight in his chest didn't lift. He parked in the driveway and stared at the house for a long moment before he got out of the car. The sun had just dipped below the horizon and darkness was creeping in. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Mark had always enjoyed the silence, the peace of being alone, but now it felt eerie. He set the sword down gently on the table in his living room, its presence seeming to fill the space like a shadow. It was a strange comfort, but also a terrifying burden. He stared at the blade, unsure of what to do next. The symbols on the metal seemed to shimmer in the dim light, their ancient language almost alive, as if they were shifting in and out of focus. As he leaned closer, a strange chill ran through his fingers, almost as if the sword was responding to him. A wave of energy coursed through him, and for a moment he thought he saw something not entirely of this world, standing just beyond the edge of his vision. It was gone in an instant, but the fear remained. Mark shook his head, brushing off the feeling. Maybe he was just tired, still rattled from the temple. But then, as he turned away, a voice called to him. "Mark." He froze. The voice wasn't his own, nor was it anyone else's he recognized. It was deep, resonant, and filled with power, as if the very earth itself was speaking. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He turned back toward the sword, unsure of what he had heard. The sword was glowing, not with light, but with energy, pulsing, steady, like a heartbeat. The ancient script on the blade flashed brightly, and for the briefest moment, Mark could swear the message had changed. "Your enemies have begun to stir." Mark's breath hitched. The voice had come from the sword, he realized. The very weapon he had found in the temple. The sword was speaking to him. His hand shook as he reached toward it, but the voice was gone, and the glow dimmed. It was at that moment he knew. He wasn't just holding an ancient weapon, he was holding a curse. Hours passed as Mark sat in silence, contemplating everything. The sword was more than a relic. It had chosen him. The inscription, the strange energy, it was all connected to something much bigger than he had understood. Something dark and powerful and ancient. It was as if the sword itself was alive, with its own will, and now that it had found its new bearer, its power was beginning to awaken. Unable to stay in the house any longer, Mark grabbed the sword and left. He didn't know why, but he felt the need to take it somewhere, anywhere, where it might be safe. He wasn't sure what kind of enemies the sword was referring to, but he had to prepare. Outside, the night was cold, the streets illuminated by the occasional street lamp. He walked aimlessly for hours, trying to clear his mind. With each step, he felt more disconnected from reality, like he was being drawn into a world that wasn't his own. The world around him felt different. His senses were heightened. The rustling of leaves in the trees, the distant hum of cars, even the fluttering of birds' wings, everything seemed amplified. He could hear things he had never noticed before, smell things he never could have imagined. The sword had somehow opened his awareness, heightened his connection to the world in ways he couldn't understand, but it wasn't just the world around him that had changed. There were people watching him. He didn't see them, but he felt their gaze, hidden in the shadows, waiting for him to slip up. It was a sharp, prickling sensation, like being stalked. The enemies were already here, lurking in the dark. As Mark hurried back toward his house, the air grew tense. He was being followed, but he didn't know by whom. His pulse quickened, and he gripped the sword tighter, feeling a strange sense of protection, though it was not entirely his own. He turned a corner and froze. There, standing in front of him, was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. He wore an outfit that resembled military armor, but there was something unusual about it, an ancient design, almost ceremonial. The man's expression was calm, but there was a hunger in his gaze, like a predator waiting to pounce. "You have the sword," the man said, his voice deep and cold. Mark took a step back, feeling the weight of the sword in his hands. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. The man tilted his head slightly, studying Mark. "I am the last of the fallen warrior's enemies," he said slowly. "I've been searching for that sword for a long time." Mark's blood ran cold. The words echoed in his mind. "All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies." The man's lips curled into a cruel smile. "And now, you are mine." Before Mark could react, the man lunged forward, moving faster than he thought possible. But as if on instinct, Mark raised the sword. A surge of power ran through him. The sword hummed with energy, and a bright flash erupted from the blade, blinding Mark for a split second. When the light faded, the man was gone, vanished without a trace. Mark stood there, his heart pounding, the sword still humming in his hands. He didn't understand what had just happened, but one thing was certain: the sword's curse was real. And now, there was no escaping it. Mark's heart raced as he hurried back to his house, the sword still heavy in his grip. He couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The man, the strange figure who had appeared out of nowhere. Mark had never seen anything like him before, and the way the sword had reacted, the flash of light that had come from it, it all felt too unreal. It was as if the weapon had a life of its own, guiding him, protecting him, or perhaps even controlling him. He couldn't understand it, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just an archaeologist. He was a part of something much bigger. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft rustling sound coming from behind him. He spun around but saw nothing. The street was empty, the night silent, yet Mark felt an unsettling presence in the air. It was as if someone, or something, was watching him. He tightened his grip on the sword, his senses on high alert. The feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger, more intense, until Mark couldn't ignore it any longer. His footsteps quickened. As he neared his home, the feeling of being followed growing with each passing second. He reached his front door and stepped inside, locking it behind him. The sword, still in his hand, seemed to pulse with an energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It wasn't just the weight of the weapon that troubled him. It was the presence, the sense that something was stirring, something ancient and dangerous. Mark turned to place the sword on the table, but before he could move, there was a loud crash from outside the house. He froze, his heart pounding. He rushed to the window, pulling the curtains aside just enough to peer out into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing, just the empty street, lit by the occasional flicker of a streetlight. Then he saw it, a figure cloaked in shadows, moving quickly toward his front door. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was the same man from earlier, the one who had attacked him. The same strange armor, the same cold eyes. But now there were others with him, standing in the darkness just beyond the reach of the streetlights. There was a small group of them, all wearing the same kind of ceremonial armor, their faces hidden in the shadows. Mark's instincts kicked in. He had to act fast. He grabbed the sword, his fingers trembling as he held it in front of him. The sword seemed to respond to his touch, vibrating slightly as if it were alive. Mark didn't know how to fight, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let these people, these enemies, get their hands on him. The sound of footsteps grew louder as the figures approached his door. Mark didn't wait any longer. He dashed to the back of the house, throwing open the door and stepping out into the backyard. He knew he couldn't stay inside. It was too dangerous. The backyard was quiet, the air cool against his skin. But the sense of being hunted was overpowering. He didn't have much time. He needed to find a way to defend himself, something, anything, that could help him survive the coming fight. As if in response to his thoughts, the sword pulsed with energy again, and Mark felt a strange sensation course through his body. It was like an awakening, a flood of knowledge that wasn't his own. His senses sharpened, and he could hear the faintest sound of the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. He felt the ground beneath his feet, the vibrations in the earth, the distant hum of a city he could no longer feel a part of. But there was more. There was something else, something deeper. The sword had awakened something inside him, an ancient knowledge, a combat skill that he had never learned. It was as if the sword had given him the ability to fight, to defend himself against whatever was coming. Mark's eyes widened as he raised the sword in front of him. He had no training, no experience in combat, yet the movements felt natural. The sword felt like an extension of his own body, and as he swung it through the air, he felt a sense of power, power that had once belonged to the fallen warrior. Just as Mark steadied himself, the first of the enemies emerged from the shadows, stepping into the yard. The man in the ceremonial armor, the one who had attacked him before, looked directly at Mark, his eyes filled with cold hatred. "You cannot escape," the man said, his voice low and threatening. Mark's grip tightened on the sword. He wasn't afraid, not anymore. He had no idea who these people were, but he knew they were dangerous. He couldn't let them take him. Without thinking, Mark lunged forward, the sword slicing through the air with a speed he didn't know he was capable of. The man raised his own weapon, a jagged, dark blade, to block the strike. There was a loud clash as metal met metal, and for a moment, both warriors stood locked in place, testing each other's strength. Mark could feel the force of the strike, vibrating through his arms, but the sword seemed to guide him, giving him the power to push back. He didn't know how he was doing it, but he wasn't going to stop. The enemy warrior tried to shift his weight, aiming for Mark's side, but Mark reacted instinctively, spinning out of the way with surprising agility. He wasn't just fighting. He was dancing with the blade, moving with a fluid grace that felt completely foreign and yet completely natural. Before the enemy could recover, Mark struck again, this time with a downward swing. The enemy's blade was knocked aside, and Mark's sword found its mark. The man fell to the ground with a grunt, his weapon clattering out of reach. Mark stood over him, panting, his heart racing. The fight had ended before he even realized. It had begun. He hadn't just defended himself. He had won, but there was no time to celebrate. The other enemies were closing in, their eyes burning with anger. Mark didn't have much time before they attacked again. He could hear the soft, almost imperceptible sound of their movements. The sword pulsed again in his hands, and Mark knew what he had to do. He raised the blade, preparing for the next fight. Mark stood in the middle of the backyard, breathing heavily, his grip still tight around the sword. The moment of victory was over, but the fight wasn't. The other enemies were closing in, and he knew that he couldn't take them all on by himself. There were too many of them, and he was still new to this, new to the sword, new to the strange abilities it had awakened in him. The first man, the one he had just defeated, lay motionless on the ground, but the others moved quickly, surrounding him with determined eyes. Mark's heart pounded, his senses heightened. He could hear their footsteps, their breathing, even the rustling of the leaves in the trees. The air felt heavy, as if every second was stretching longer than it should. But this time, he wasn't as afraid. The sword, now familiar in his hands, pulsed with energy. It was as if it had become a part of him. The knowledge that it carried, ancient, powerful knowledge, was now a part of him too. He didn't understand it all, but he knew that the sword was a key, and the enemies he faced were part of something much bigger. One of the enemies, a tall figure with a dark cloak, stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his own weapon. "You've done well to survive this long," the man said, his voice deep and cold, "but your strength is nothing compared to what's coming." Mark didn't respond. He didn't need to. He could feel the truth in the man's words. These people weren't just a threat to him. They were part of something much larger, something that had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The sword had been part of a long-forgotten war, a war that had torn the galaxy apart. And now, Mark had unknowingly become a part of it. The man continued, his eyes narrowing as he studied Mark. "You think the sword will protect you? You think you are the warrior chosen by fate? You are nothing but a pawn in a much larger game." Mark clenched his jaw. The words hit him harder than he expected, but he couldn't let them distract him. He couldn't let them break him. He raised the sword in front of him, feeling its weight, its power. "I don't care about fate. I care about surviving." The enemy warrior smiled cruelly. "Then survive, human. But know this. Those who wield the sword cannot escape its destiny." With a sudden, fluid movement, the warrior lunged forward, his blade aimed directly at Mark's chest. Mark reacted instinctively, raising his sword to block the strike. The two blades clashed with a loud clang, sending vibrations through Mark's arms. The enemy warrior pressed forward, trying to force Mark back, but the sword in Mark's hands seemed to push back with even greater strength, guiding his every move. Mark spun, stepping to the side and dodging the enemy's next strike. The sword moved with him, and he parried the blow, sending the enemy's weapon crashing into the ground. Before the warrior could recover, Mark took his chance and lunged forward, his sword slicing through the air with precision. The blow landed, and the warrior fell to the ground, his breath leaving him in a slow, painful exhale. But there was no time to dwell on the victory. Mark quickly turned his attention to the others who had surrounded him. They were watching, waiting for their turn. The first enemy was down, but there were still at least 3 more left. Mark's pulse raced. He couldn't keep fighting like this forever. He needed help. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the backyard. It was a woman, tall and fierce, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to gleam with knowledge. She was dressed in dark armor, her presence commanding attention. She walked toward Mark with confidence, her eyes fixed on him. "I thought I might find you here," she said, her voice steady and calm. "You're not alone in this, Mark." Mark blinked in surprise. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cautious. "I'm Cora," she replied, her eyes scanning the enemies around him. "And I've been watching you. I know what you've found. And I know the danger it brings." Mark didn't lower the sword, but he was curious. "Danger? What kind of danger?" Cora's eyes flicked to the enemy warriors, then back to Mark. "The sword you hold is not just a weapon. It's a symbol, a key to a much larger war. You are part of that war now, and if you want to survive, you need to fight back with everything you have." Mark's mind raced. "Why are you helping me?" "I'm not helping you," Cora said, her voice sharp. "I'm helping the galaxy, and the sooner you understand that, the better. The people you're fighting are not just enemies. They are remnants of a lost empire, one that was destroyed by the very sword you hold. And they've come back for it." Mark looked at the sword in his hands. It was pulsing again, stronger this time. The words from the blade echoed in his mind. "All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies." He didn't understand it all, but he knew one thing. He couldn't back down. He had to fight. "Then I'll fight," Mark said, his voice filled with determination. "But I'm not doing it alone." Cora smiled slightly. "Good. You'll need all the help you can get." With that, Cora moved toward the enemy warriors, her own weapon, a sleek, curved blade, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Mark followed, his sword at the ready. The two of them formed a quick, deadly duo, each moving with precision, their weapons dancing through the air in a blur of motion. The first of the remaining enemies lunged at Cora, but she was faster. She sidestepped the attack, her blade cutting through the enemy's defenses and sending him to the ground with a single strike. Mark, meanwhile, engaged the last two warriors, his movements more confident than before. The sword guided him, the ancient power surging through him with every strike. The battle was fierce, but Mark could feel the sword's power growing stronger, guiding him with each move. It was like an extension of his own body, and he was learning to trust it. The more he fought, the more natural it felt. And with every victory, he could sense the sword's power awakening inside him, pushing him further into this strange, dangerous new world. As the last enemy warrior fell to the ground, Mark stood, panting, his heart racing. Cora walked over, to him her face serious. "You've done well," she said, her voice calm but filled with approval. "But this is just the beginning. The war has only just started." Mark looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready." Mark stood in the aftermath of the battle, breathing heavily as he looked around at the fallen enemies. Their bodies lay scattered on the ground, but something still lingered in the air. The fight had been won, but it wasn't over. There was still more to come. Cora stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. The night was eerily quiet now, the only sounds coming from the soft rustling of leaves in the trees. She had been an unexpected ally, but Mark had already come to trust her. She had been right. He wasn't alone in this fight. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from over," Cora said, her voice low but firm. "The enemies you've faced so far are nothing compared to what's waiting for you." Mark nodded, still gripping the sword in his hand. The weapon, once strange and foreign, now felt like an extension of his body. It pulsed with energy, as if alive, guiding his movements. He didn't fully understand its power, but he knew it was the key to his survival. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something he hadn't yet uncovered. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, his voice steady despite the fear he felt inside. "Who are these people? Why are they after me?" Cora turned to him, her expression grave. "They're not just enemies. They are the remnants of an ancient empire, one that was destroyed by the fallen warrior who once wielded that sword. That warrior, the one whose power you now carry, was once part of a rebellion. He fought against the empire's tyranny, and, in the end, he destroyed it, but not completely. Some survived, and now they've come back." Mark's mind raced as he tried to piece everything together. "So they want the sword because it's the key to bringing back their empire?" Cora nodded. Exactly. They believe that if they reclaim the sword, they can restore the Empire's power and take control of the galaxy once again. But they're not just after the sword. They're after you. You are the one who holds its power now. And if they can take you down, they can take the sword. Mark tightened his grip on the sword, feeling the weight of its history and the burden of its power. It was hard to believe that a weapon like this could change the fate of the galaxy. But the more he fought, the more he realized that there was no turning back. He had become part of something much larger than himself. What happens if they succeed? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Cora's gaze hardened, and she stepped closer to him. If they succeed, the galaxy will fall into chaos. The Empire will rise again, and the people will suffer. The sword holds the power to destroy worlds, Mark. It's not just a weapon, it's a force of nature. And if it falls into the wrong hands, there's no telling what they could do with it. Mark's stomach churned as he imagined the destruction that could follow if the wrong people gained control of the sword. He had to stop them. But how? We can't keep running from them, Mark said, his voice filled with determination. We need to find a way to end this, once and for all. Cora nodded, her eyes reflecting the same resolve. I agree. But we need to understand the sword's true power first. There's a place where we can learn more, an old temple, hidden deep within the mountains. It's said to hold the key to understanding the sword's origins. If we can get there, we might be able to uncover its secrets. Mark hesitated for a moment. The thought of traveling to an unknown place, facing more enemies and uncovering the truth about the sword was overwhelming. But there was no other choice. He had to know what he was dealing with. Let's go, he said, his voice steady. The journey to the temple was long and dangerous. The mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky like the teeth of some great beast. Mark and Cora moved quickly, staying off the beaten path to avoid any more attacks. They knew the enemies were still out there, hunting them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they traveled deeper into the mountains, the air grew colder. The landscape was desolate, a stark contrast to the warmth of the cities they had left behind. The further they went, the more Mark felt the weight of the sword pressing down on him. It was as if the sword itself was guiding them, pulling them forward toward something important. By the time they reached the temple, the sun was beginning to set. The structure was ancient, covered in vines and moss, its stone walls weathered by time. Mark could feel the power emanating from it, a quiet energy that seemed to hum in the air. This is it, Cora said, her voice filled with awe. The temple of the fallen warrior. The answers you seek are inside. Mark looked at her, his nerves tingling. Are we ready for this? Cora gave him a small smile. We don't have a choice. The temple holds the knowledge of the sword's true origins. If we can unlock its secrets, we can stop the Empire from rising again. Together they stepped into the temple, their footsteps echoing in the vast silence. Inside, the walls were covered with intricate carvings, depicting battles and victories, sacrifices and loss. The air was thick with history, the weight of ancient knowledge pressing down on them. At the center of the temple, there was an altar, and on that altar, a large stone tablet rested. Cora stepped forward, her hands gently brushing the surface of the stone. She turned to Mark, her expression serious. This is it. The key to understanding the sword. Mark stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what to expect. But he knew one thing. The answers he sought were just beyond his reach. If he could unlock the secrets of the sword, he might finally have the power to stop the Empire from rising again. As Cora began to speak, the ancient words inscribed on the tablet, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low, rumbling sound filled the air, and Mark felt a rush of energy surge through him. The sword in his hand pulsed violently, as if reacting to the words Cora was speaking. And then, with a flash of light, the world around them changed. Mark's heart raced as the light from the temple's altar engulfed him. For a moment, he thought he might be swallowed by it, drowned in the energy that seemed to hum from the very walls around them. The sword in his hand throbbed with power, its pulse in perfect sync with the trembling ground beneath his feet. It was as if the sword was alive, responding to something that was awakening within the ancient temple. Cora stood beside him, her face pale but determined, as she recited the ancient words. Mark could feel the weight of the knowledge she was unlocking, the very secrets that had been hidden for centuries. As the final words left Cora's lips, the air grew still, and the tremors ceased. The light faded, leaving only the faint glow from the symbols etched into the stone tablet. "What just happened?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cora turned to him, her eyes wide with realization. "We've uncovered the truth. The sword. It's more than just a weapon. It's a key, Mark. A key to an ancient power that could change the course of history." Mark looked down at the sword, his grip tightening. He had always known that the blade held great power, but this revelation made it seem even more dangerous. He wasn't just holding a weapon. He was holding the potential for the rise or fall of entire civilizations. "The sword was created to destroy the Empire," Cora continued, her voice steady but filled with gravity. "The fallen warrior who once wielded it did so to stop a tyrannical rule that spanned across the galaxy. But the Empire wasn't completely destroyed. Some of its leaders survived, and they've been waiting for the right moment to reclaim their power." Mark nodded, his mind racing. "And now they're after the sword because it holds the power to bring them back." Cora glanced at the altar, her expression filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "Yes, and now that the sword has chosen you, you are the only one who can stop them. The key to defeating the Empire lies in your hands, Mark. But you must decide how to use it." Mark's stomach tightened. He hadn't asked for any of this. He had never wanted to be a part of an ancient war. He had only wanted to uncover the secrets of the past, to learn about the civilizations that had come before him. But now, the past had come crashing into his life, and he couldn't escape it. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Mark admitted, his voice heavy with doubt. "I'm not a warrior. I don't know how to fight this battle." Cora placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but reassuring. "You don't have to fight alone. You have allies, people who believe in you. And the sword, it will guide you. It's more than just a weapon, it's a part of you now. You just have to trust it." Mark stared at the sword, his mind swirling with the weight of the decision before him. The sword had already given him strength, but at what cost? He had already felt its power guiding him, but each time he used it, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was leading him toward something he didn't fully understand. "If I use it," Mark said quietly, "what happens to me? Will I become like the fallen warrior? Will I lose myself to the sword's power?" Cora's expression softened. "The sword doesn't control you, Mark, but it does change you. It changes how you see the world, how you fight, how you think. You'll have to fight the temptation to use its power recklessly, but if you can resist that temptation, you'll find the strength you need to defeat the Empire." Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the sword in his hands. The power that had once terrified him now felt strangely comforting. It was a part of him, and he had to learn to control it, not let it control him. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "I'll fight. I'll stop the Empire." Cora nodded. "Good, but we're not done yet. The enemies who attacked you before, they're only a small part of the larger threat. The true leaders of the Empire are out there hiding in the shadows, and they know you're coming." Mark's pulse quickened. "Then we need to find them. We need to take the fight to them before they're ready." Cora's eyes flickered with determination. "We will, but we have to be careful. The Empire's forces are powerful, and they won't hesitate to use everything they have to stop us. We need a plan." Mark glanced back at the temple, feeling the weight of the sword's power. He had made his choice. He couldn't back down now. The sword had given him the strength to survive, and now he would use it to take the fight to the Empire. Cora was right. He wasn't alone in this. There were others who believed in him, others who would stand with him. Together, they would take down the remnants of the Empire and prevent it from rising again. "We'll need to gather allies," Mark said, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll need to be ready for whatever comes next." Cora smiled, her expression one of approval. "I've already made some contacts. There are others who will help us. But we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the stronger the Empire becomes." Mark nodded, his eyes narrowing with focus. He wasn't going to waste any more time. The war had already started, and he had to be ready. The sword would guide him, but he had to make the choice to use its power wisely. As they left the temple and stepped back into the cold night air, Mark knew that the path ahead would be dangerous. But he also knew that he was no longer the same person he had been before. The sword had awakened something inside him, and now he had the strength to fight for what was right. The battle for the galaxy had begun, and Mark was ready to face whatever came his way.